Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamersIntercom video, we're going to be discussing tech and gaming news which have popped up as usual over the past 24 or so hours. The first and perhaps leading story of the day is an N64 controller trademark which Nintendo have just filed. Now this is probably a good indicator that the company are at least considering an N64 Classic. We'll get into that in a moment. Then we're going to move over to AMD because it has confirmed that the platform security code within its processors will remain closed source. Now this is very important because of security reasons, so we're going to be discussing this because there are a couple of different mindsets on whether you should close source this or not. But as I said, the first story, without a question, is going to be the N64 controller. This was actually spotted by a NeoGAF user, as a lot of stuff tends to be fair. His name is Rusty. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that, correctly. The patent is pretty long, so I'll read it out, not exactly verbatim, but telecommunication machine apparatus, electronic storage devices recorded with programs for computers, blah blah blah. And the date of this was 18/07/2017, so basically just a couple of days ago. Now, there is actually some precedent for reasons to be excited behind this, because Nintendo have also filed a couple of other trademarks when it comes to controllers. The Switch being pretty obvious, but also the NES and the SNES. The latter two consoles, the NES and the SNES, of course, received the classic console treatment, and those systems since then have been pretty much gold dust. Well, of course, the SNES Classic hasn't exactly been on sale yet, but still, we know that it's not going to be exactly plentiful, in supply, and it looks like if this is true with the N64 Classic, we can probably make the assumption that the N64 Classic Mini would also be very short in supply as well. Hopefully Nintendo will actually fix its supply chain problems, but I'm not exactly super hopeful about that. I would totally want to buy the N64 Classic. It's one of those consoles where I've always meant to buy one. I did own one for a very short period of time, but because I already had a gaming PC, a Sega Saturn, and a PlayStation, and I was pretty young at the time, I just couldn't afford the upkeep of like 4 systems. It just wasn't going to happen. And because N64 games were pretty expensive at the time of its release because of the cartridge format, I just decided, it's probably better for me to stick with the other couple of consoles. And as I said, I was just getting into PC gaming, and 3D accelerators were becoming kind of a thing. So that meant that was another cost I had to kind of bear. So I just didn't really get into N64 gaming. And looking back on it, I somewhat regret that now because there were so many awesome games. I only ever played a little bit of Mario 64, for example. I've certainly played it, but not really completed it. And the same for quite a few other games on the N64, which were considered classics. The only one that I really played a hell of a lot of was GoldenEye. And I can imagine a lot of you feel the same with GoldenEye. I mean, let's face it, who hasn't either played the multiplayer side of it or possibly done quite a few of the missions on the single player. I really want to try this console out. I think it's going to be absolutely phenomenal. Of course, we all know about emulation, and some of those games have also come to other systems and are certainly playable, but if you want to have the legitimate N64 experience with the controller, yes, you can get N64 controllers, which are at least N64-like controllers for the PC, but still, a lot of people do prefer to play on the original system. The problem with the original system, the one that of course was released back in the day, is that, video out, especially in PAL regions, is not ideal. The NTSC machines had S-video support, and actually from what I'm reading and I've heard, they could actually be modded to even support RGB, which obviously is pretty ideal. Unfortunately, not so much in the PAL regions, and a base machine would only really be able to accept composite out. And there were ways around this, but it was not exactly, standard, and sometimes you'd have to do console mods and all that stuff. So when one considers that, of course, now we have HD TVs, and those composite images just look even worse. Now for another news story, which is actually involving AMD, and this time it's not Vega related or even Threadripper. Well, kind of Threadripper. And this is AMD have confirmed that its platform security processor code will remain closed source. What I find rather astounding about this is how people were surprised. Now, if you don't know what it is, I'll quickly give you a too long didn't read synopsis. Essentially, what it does is, I'll read out actually a verbatim quote from their own website. A system-wide approach to security. It runs on top of the hardware, creating a secure environment by partitioning a CPU into two virtual sensitive worlds. Virtual worlds. Sensitive tasks are run on the AMD secure processor in the secure world, while the other tasks are run in standard operation. And this helps to ensure that secure storage and processing of sensitive data and trusted applications. Now, we have gone through quite a number of times how AMD are really pushing security on the certain Ryzen processors, and it is pretty awesome. Now, here's the thing. It's in the operating system. This is pretty much invisible. So you, in theory, if this code was hacked, if it was infected with malware, you wouldn't really be able to just remove it by simply running, let's say, an antivirus. It just wouldn't work. So it makes it even worse because not only would you probably not be able to remove it yourself, there's a very good chance you probably wouldn't even know you were infected. So there has been some who have asked AMD to open source the PSP, also known once again as the Platform Security Processor Code, to the general community. And the reason behind that is pretty simple. If you have 10 people working in a company looking at this code, you're much more likely to miss exploits than if, say, 10,000 people on the internet are looking for this particular piece of code. Unfortunately, AMD have said no, at least to the perspective of those individuals, but I kinda don't blame them. Here's the problem, because let's say that they were to release this source code, and it did indeed have an exploit. I'm not saying it does have an exploit. There has been no exploits found, at least what has been stated publicly. There have been no exploits found, but I'm saying, let's say there was an exploit that was found in the code, but then that person didn't disclose that exploit, which they should do. Instead, what they did is use that to release a worm or a virus or whatever to actually take control or to maliciously damage the system. Well, that basically means you've just provided the keys to the gates for people to run in and blow up your own kingdom. There are a couple of other reasons probably that they've chosen not to do this. I'm not 100% certain because, well, obviously they're not going to release all of this information, but it's possible that some of the code or technology behind this is intellectual property that they are licensing. Therefore, they don't have the rights to open source that code. So, for example, let's say that, Bob, who works at company A, has written that code, and therefore, although AMD are licensed to use it, they're certainly not licensed to, release the source code of that to the internet at large. So obviously, in that instance, AMD just can't do this. And AMD have said on a Twitch stream, when they were asked if they wanted to or had any intention of releasing this, pretty much no. It was a pretty short and sweet answer. And I would feel exactly the same if it were Intel on the other end of these questions. I would say that they also should say no. With that said, of course, I'm hoping that AMD have done the due diligence and the bug testing internally and probably done whatever else they need to do to make sure that this code is secure. And I'm assuming they've done that. But honestly, I think this is one of those scenarios where it's really good to not open source. I generally am a fan of open source hardware and software. Open source code and software, because I think it just is good for the industry. One of the reasons I'm quite a fan of modding, but I think this might just be one of those exceptions. Anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.